Imagine sitting down at your computer in 2026, powering it on, and for a brief second, genuinely forgetting whether you're on a Mac or a Linux machine. The dock glides smoothly at the bottom of the screen, windows blur softly in the background, animations feel polished and intentional, and everything just feels macOS. That's the magic of modern Linux. Over the years, Linux distributions have evolved far beyond their old geeky reputation, and now many of them are designed specifically to replicate the look and feel of Apple's Mac OS while keeping all the freedom, privacy, and performance benefits that Linux is famous for. In this video, we're diving deep into the top 10 Linux distros in 2026 that look and feel almost exactly like Mac OS. And I'm not just talking about the wallpaper or a dock slapped on the bottom. These distros capture the workflow, the design language, the animations, and the overall vibe of macOS so well that even longtime Mac users feel instantly at home. Let's start with the first experience you get when you boot into one of these macOS-like Linux systems: the smoothness. In 2026, Linux desktops have reached a level of polish that rivals, and in some cases surpasses, macOS itself. Window animations are fluid, touchpad gestures are natural, and high DPI displays are handled beautifully. The first distro that really nails this experience is one that has become almost legendary in the Linux community for its Apple-inspired design. From the login screen to the desktop, everything is minimal, elegant, and carefully spaced. The dock sits front and center, icons are crisp, system fonts are clean, and the overall color palette feels straight out of Cupertino. What really sells the Mac OS illusion here is the attention to detail. Things like global menus, smooth workspace switching, and subtle transparency effects all combine to create an environment that feels premium rather than customized. As you move through this distro, you start to notice how familiar everything feels if you've ever used a Mac. The file manager behaves like Finder, with sidebar shortcuts that make sense, quick previews of files, and simple drag-and-drop workflows. System settings are neatly organized, not overwhelming, and visually consistent. Even the way notifications slide in from the corner feels Mac OS-inspired. But under the hood, you're running a powerful Linux system that's faster, more customizable, and far less restrictive than Mac OS. This is a recurring theme across all the distros on this list. They give you the look and feel of Mac OS without locking you into Apple's ecosystem. Another distro that deserves a spot in the top 10 is one that takes a slightly different approach. Instead of copying Mac OS 101, it focuses on recreating the Mac OS experience in spirit. The desktop environment is heavily customized to resemble Mac OS, with a sleek dock, top panel, and consistent icon theme. In 2026, this distro has matured into a rock-solid daily driver, perfect for users who want a Mac-like interface but also want control over every aspect of their system. What stands out here is performance. Even on older hardware, this distro runs smoothly, which is something many Mac users wish they could say about newer versions of Mac OS on older Macs. Animations are smooth but not resource-hungry, and the system remains responsive, even with multiple applications open. Then there's the distro that many people consider the closest visual clone of Mac OS available on Linux, if you put this system side by side with Mac OS Sonoma or whatever the latest Mac OS version is in 2026, most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference at first glance. The dock icons are nearly identical in style, window controls sit exactly where you expect them to, and the overall UI spacing mirrors Apple's design guidelines. What really pushes this distro over the edge is its default theme pack. It includes macOS's style cursors, fonts, sounds, and even boot animations that feel distinctly Apple-like. For users transitioning from macOS to Linux, this distro often becomes the easiest and least intimidating option. In 2026, one of the biggest improvements across Mac OS-like Linux distros is gesture support. Trackpad gestures are a huge part of the Mac experience, and Linux has finally caught up in a big way. Several distros on this list now support 3-finger and 4-finger gestures out of the box, allowing you to switch workspaces, show all open windows, or launch the application overview just like on a MacBook. One particular distro stands out here because it was clearly designed with laptops in mind. On a good trackpad, it genuinely feels like using a MacBook, but with better battery optimization options and more control over power management. Another strong contender on this list focuses heavily on aesthetics and user experience. This distro is often praised for feeling premium right from the start. The installer is simple and clean. The first boot experience guides you gently through customization, and the default desktop looks stunning without requiring any tweaks. In 2026, this distro has added even more macOS-inspired features, such as dynamic wallpapers that change throughout the day, refined dark mode support, and a polished App Store experience. The App Store itself feels similar to the Mac App Store, with curated apps, clean screenshots, and easy installation. For users who want a Mac-like experience without spending hours tweaking themes and settings, this distro is a dream come true. Now let's talk about a distro that's perfect for creative professionals. macOS has long been the platform of choice for designers, video editors, and musicians, but in 2026, Linux has become a serious competitor in this space. One macOS-inspired Linux distro in particular has gained popularity among creatives because of its stability, performance, and beautiful interface. It comes pre-installed with many creative tools, or at least makes them incredibly easy to install. The desktop layout feels familiar to Mac users, making the transition painless. Color accuracy, font rendering, and high-resolution display support are all top-notch, which is crucial for creative work. This distro proves that you don't need a Mac to have a Mac-like creative workflow. There's also a distro on this list that appeals to users who love macOS but hate Apple's closed ecosystem. This distro looks like macOS, feels like macOS, but gives you complete freedom. You can customize everything from the kernel to the desktop environment, install software from multiple sources, and never worry about being locked out of your own system. In 2026, privacy has become a major concern for many users, and this distro shines in that area. Unlike macOS, which is deeply integrated with Apple's cloud services, this Linux alternative gives you full control over what data leaves your machine. Yet, despite all this freedom, it never feels messy or unfinished. The developers have clearly put a lot of effort into making sure the user experience remains smooth and consistent. Another interesting entry in the top 10 is a distro that's technically not macOS-like out of the box, but with its official macOS-style desktop option, it becomes one of the best alternatives available. In 2026, many Linux distros offer multiple desktop environments, and this one includes a beautifully crafted macOS-inspired layout as a first-class option. When you select it during installation, you're greeted with a dock, a top panel, and a set of themes that instantly remind you of macOS. What's great about this approach is flexibility. If you ever get tired of the macOS look, you can switch to a completely different desktop style without reinstalling your system. It's like having multiple operating systems in one. As we move further down the list, we come to a distro that has gained a cult following for its attention to detail. This is the kind of system where even the smallest UI elements feel thoughtfully designed. Buttons have the right amount of padding, animations don't feel rushed or sluggish, and the overall desktop feels cohesive. macOS users who try this distro often comment on how right it feels. In 2026, this distro has refined its macOS-like theme even further, with improved window shadows, smoother transitions, and better integration between system apps. It's not just about copying macOS visually, but about capturing the same sense of refinement and balance. One of the most surprising entries in the top 10 is a distro that started as a simple customization project and grew into a full-fledged operating system. This distro was created by macOS fans who wanted the same look and feel on Linux without the hassle of manually installing themes, docks, and extensions. In 2026, it has become incredibly polished, with its own identity while still staying true to macOS aesthetics. The dock is fast and responsive, the app launcher feels modern, and the overall desktop is a joy to use. It's especially popular among users who are new to Linux and want something familiar and visually appealing right from day one. Finally, we come to a distro that represents the future of macOS-like Linux desktops. This system takes everything that works about macOS and reimagines it with Linux flexibility. The interface is clean, minimal, and distraction-free, but power users can dive deep into customization if they want. In 2026, this distro supports cutting-edge display technologies, advanced gesture controls, and seamless integration with modern hardware. On a high-end laptop or desktop, it feels incredibly smooth and responsive. Many users who switch to this distro say that after a few weeks they don't miss macOS at all. They get the same beautiful interface, but with better performance, more control, and no forced updates or ecosystem lock-in. What all these top 10 macOS-like Linux distros have in common is choice. In 2026, you're no longer forced to buy expensive hardware or accept closed ecosystems just to enjoy a beautiful, polished desktop experience. Linux gives you options. You can choose a distro that looks exactly like macOS or one that simply feels like it in terms of workflow and design philosophy. You can run it on a brand new laptop or breathe new life into an older machine. You can customize everything or leave it exactly as the developers intended. If you're a longtime Mac user thinking about switching to Linux, these distros make the transition smoother than ever. And if you're already a Linux user who loves macOS aesthetics, 2026 is an amazing time to explore these options. The line between macOS and Linux, at least visually and experientially, has never been thinner. By the end of this video, you'll realize that you don't need macOS to enjoy the macOS experience. Linux has arrived, and it looks better than ever.